España es aire, aire y sol. 1, 2, 3, 30, 300 días de sol al año. Y campos y mares. Y un ancho océano. España es tierra de molinos que doman el viento. Desde siempre, nación de viento, sol, de tierra ancha y aguas profundas. Un país de energía inagotable que apuesta por desplegar sus recursos naturales para acelerar la transición ecológica y crecer de forma sostenible y descarbonizada gracias a ese potencial privilegiado. Somos el octavo país con mayor potencia renovable instalada y el segundo en Europa. Casi la mitad de la generación eléctrica nacional ya es renovable. Un sector con más de 111.000 empleos que se triplicarán en esta década. Y ya somos el 10º mercado más atractivo en el mundo para inversiones en energía verde. En el nuevo modelo energético que destierra los combustibles fósiles, el ciudadano se erige en actor principal. En España el autoconsumo se ha multiplicado por 10 desde 2017 y el mapa de las comunidades energéticas crece cada día. España ha situado el clima y la energía en el centro de una transformación integral para lograr la neutralidad climática en 2050. Una economía de bajas emisiones competitiva y eficiente que asegure la soberanía energética con recursos limpios y propios y garantice la protección de los hogares. Esta transición debe ser justa con las personas y los territorios. La premisa es no dejar a nadie atrás, creando alternativas innovadoras, manteniendo el empleo y la población con inversiones ligadas a la economía verde, con diálogo y participación ciudadana. En este camino a la descarbonización, SPIREC 23 arranca como foro para crear sinergias y sumar voces de alto nivel al debate de cómo encajar las piezas en el diseño del futuro energético, para ahondar juntos en este reto común con un diálogo constructivo y pleno de aciertos. El mundo nos está mirando.
Buenos días. Damos comienzo a la primera sesión en este segundo día de SPIREC. Hoy iniciamos con esta sesión titulada Energías renovables para el desarrollo social y económico de todos. Modera Anabel Sánchez. Esperamos que os resulte interesante.
Bueno, hello, good morning everybody. It's very nice to see you here. Let me invite, please, my speakers to come. Let me invite Anna Spitzberg, Deputy Assistant Secretary from the U.S. Department of State. Gloria Magombo, please. She's Secretary for Energy and Power Development from the Ministry of Energy and Power Development of Zimbabwe. Alicia Montalvo, please. She's Manager of Climate Action and Positive Biodiversity from the Development Bank of Latin America. I don't think we have Kande Junkela with us today, but if he is around, please let us know. We also have Nelson Lache, President from the European Energy Network and President of the Portuguese Energy Agency. Paolo Frank, please join us. Paolo is Head of Renewable Energy Division from the International Energy Agency. I'm not sure we have Ibrahim Yakubu because I think he just arrived, so he may join us very soon. Please, Mr. Romeo Mikautzadze, Minister of Economy and Sustainable Development of Georgia. Thank you very much for joining us. So we are going to talk about something which is very important for all the countries where we are all working. It's about the social and economic development for all and how renewable energies can help us to reach that. We know that the number of people without electricity in the world has unfortunately increased. In 2020, 20 million new people don't have access to energy, reaching nearly 775 million people without access to energy. So this is our first challenge that, of course, we all need to do our best to meet it. But we also have climate change and the Paris Agreement and the objective of not increasing average temperature of the world beyond 1.5. So we all need renewable energies and we need to speed up implementation. If now we focus on the implementation phase, then there are a number of questions that come up to all of our minds. For example, what's the role of the private and the public sector? What happens with the public support? We all know that in many countries where renewable energies are increasing very fast, mostly in Europe, local communities are having some issues with those investments. So we need to make sure that there is an adequate participation of local communities. We need different type of energy projects to usual or to more traditional type of setting, like the community energy projects, where the community owns the energy installations. So we need to talk about that, how we can change, or should we change the rules to make sure that renewable energies are working better for all of us, are benefiting all better. Finally, we will talk about a couple more things. International finance. We, of course, need to make sure that the international finance is available for all those people that I mentioned at the beginning without access to energy. But we will also talk about just transition. We know that not everybody will be benefited by this energy transition. There will be millions and millions of new jobs around the world. So we will need skilling, reskilling, upskilling projects. We need to understand that well, how that's going to work, and also how we can make sure that we have local development, renewable industry in all different places, or how we are going to deal with that. So in order to address all these very difficult, complex, and diverse questions, I have my excellent panel here with me. And I would like to start with Paolo Frank from the International Energy Agency. And I would like to ask you, first of all, something a little bit broader to understand better what's the challenge that we are facing. What needs to be done? What needs to be put in place to ensure that society and economy underpin the transformation on the energy system to renewables?
Thank you very much, Anna. And first of all, good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting the IEA. I'm very honored to represent it in this high-level plenary. Allow me just 1 minute to set this in the right context. First of all, we are in the first truly global crisis. The number of countries that have an inflation rate higher than 6% is exactly as high as it was in the 70s, which means almost 100% of the countries, in particular in the developing world. But the most important thing is this crisis is hitting the more vulnerable more than the others. It has an asymmetric impact. And the high energy prices, the energy security is hitting some countries more than others. And you mentioned the fact that for the first time, the energy access data went in the wrong direction. Now, can renewables help in this situation? Yes, of course they can. They are the cheapest option of energy almost everywhere, and indeed we see a boom of renewables coming in the next 5 years, but not everywhere. And I insist, not everywhere. So just to give you one number, we forecast renewable power capacity to expand by 2,400 gigawatts in the next 5 years. To put this in context, this is the total amount of power capacity of China. So the world is adding a renewable China to the system. And it is also equal in the next 5 years of all the renewables that were added in the last 20 years. But not everywhere. And the extreme case is Africa. So Africa will grow, is accelerating, but it's only 2% of the total growth in the next 5 years. We have to change this and radically change it. So coming to your question very, very shortly, 4 things are needed. First, a good, predictable policies. Policy is at the same time the main driver, but also main barrier if it is not predictable. Second, plan and invest in infrastructure. PV plants are booming everywhere, but the grids need 10 years to be built and planned. So have this. Third, the cost of financing and the investment risk precisely in Africa or in emerging economies is much higher than anywhere else. The cost of financing can be 2 times, 3 times higher in developing economies than in the advanced economies and China. So look at those risks. And the fourth, most important than anything, look at the whole socio-economic impacts. Both the benefits that the renewables and the clean energy transition can bring, and the negative impacts of those who will lose the job because, for instance, they are working in coal mining. We have to think about those as well. We need to have a people-centered transition because otherwise this becomes a main barrier. I'll stop it here for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you touch upon very important issues. So the inequality in the world and how access to renewable energy costs not the same in some part of the world than the others, and Africa, and this 2%, which is a striking figure. So let me now turn to Gloria. Please, Gloria Magombo from Zimbabwe, from the Ministry of Energy of Zimbabwe, tell us, how do you see that? How do you see we can transform this energy system to renewables and make sure that this is benefiting all?
Good morning, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to participate and speak as Africans. I think there's a lot of times when a lot of people speak on our behalf. But when we talk about energy transition as Africans, especially if you look at the additional 20 million you talked about, which is having no access to modern energy, is transition from traditional fuels. People are still in the first industrial revolution who have to leapfrog to the current status of having modern access to renewable energy. We are looking at people who are cooking using open fires and firewood, which is no longer even there because there's been deforestation which has happened over the years. So what is it which hasn't been done? Because the question was, what is it which needs to be done? As Africans, we did go on the bandwagon to do the policies, change our laws, do regulatory frameworks, create new institutions which can allow for new private sector participation in infrastructure. When traditionally infrastructure had been developed through developmental banks at less cost, and we thought that the money would come, the funding hasn't come. So what needs to happen is the funding has to come to Africa to help us to move and not be left behind. Because whatever we are doing now is further alienating Africa, especially if you look at what has happened in the past 2 years. We had the pandemic, which disrupted the supply chains. All projects which were supposed to be done couldn't be done. We then have the energy crisis, which came as part of the geopolitics of Europe, but it's affecting everyone. The crisis is affecting everyone. So for us to ensure that we have programs which allow for the true well-being of people and Africans in particular, we need to be given access to finance, and finance which does not have conditionalities. There's too many conditions to finance, and it has to be affordable finance. And I think I'm happy my predecessor spoke to the fact that we're accessing finance at 3-4 times higher than those who already have achieved universal access. We are still talking about communities which don't have access. So we need to work together to make sure that is there. The other issue, apart from the incentives and all the things which we have put in place, is to be part of the value chains. I think one issue which has not been spoken about a lot is that a lot of critical minerals which are part of the renewable energy technologies are there in Africa, but they are being exported in their raw form, and there is no value addition to create the ability for Africa to generate its own income so that we are able to pay for these technologies ourselves. We really don't need people to give us handouts. What we want is to be part of this cake. And when we are talking about lithium in a country like Zimbabwe, we have come up with a regulation to say you cannot export raw lithium outside Zimbabwe. There has to be some form of value addition, and we are looking at all the critical minerals, whether it's copper, nickel, the rare earth minerals, everything is there in Africa and in abundance, but it's not being value added, which has disempowered us as Africans to be able to accept this. And we believe that the renewables are the way to go. We have abundant energy resources in terms of in their raw form, but without the conversion to usable energy, which is what we want, we will not be able to proceed. And I think we want to be at the table. We want to be part of a new way of looking at issues and not continue doing the same things every year, and then we wonder why the statistics are going south.
Okay.
So for me, that's really a definition of insanity, and as the world, we need to change the way we are doing things.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so many things now. So many challenges ahead of us. So it's about finance, it's about how we use critical mineral in an adequate manner, that it's also giving value back to the countries where the minerals are, and we all need it for the clean technologies. No, thank you. We will talk about all this in the next question, so I think that were very good opening remarks from both Gloria and Paolo. So let me now turn to Anna, please. Anna Sipskers from the US Department of State. Let's want to talk about how we can make sure that all these opportunities that we know in terms of new business, new jobs, etc., can also have this implementation at the local level. So what is necessary to build up manufacturing renewable energy-based goods, etc., to create local value for economic and society everywhere? What do you think?
Thank you, and thank you for that question. I think, one, the first thing I want to point out is that the importance of what you just said, I think, has only crystallized in many policymakers' minds over the last few years. And that is one, that renewables offer us energy security, energy independence that needs to be leveraged. But everything that goes into it is not. Mm-hmm. If we look at onshore wind, we require about 9 times the amount of minerals as we do for a natural gas plant. That opens up risk. It opens up bottlenecks for our ability to achieve deployment rates at the timeline that we need to address the climate crisis. And 2, goes to what Gloria just said, and that is that energy has the ability to not just significantly boost economic growth because of its supply, but because it as an industry can boost economic growth. And so now more than ever, we have countries and partners come to us and say, we want value creation. We don't want to sit at the upstream side of this. We know that the money is not in the upstream side, the growth, the potential for our workers, that's not where it sits. We need it across the board. And I'm a strong believer that to build out anything, we need to actively value it. And for that, I mean that it's not easy. It's not a 1-2 punch to create a supply chain and a value chain, especially in commercial technologies where you've achieved manufacturing efficiency in a certain region. At the same time, we have an amazing opportunity because, to Paulo's point, the increase in capacity that's about to happen for clean technologies and renewables is so significant that there is an opportunity to come into this space. And we know we also have bottlenecks where we can have technologies handicapped by natural disasters, by logistics, by labor, by all sorts of health issues these days that we need to diversify. That creates an opportunity. What else creates an opportunity is that there is a demand for diversification of product and differentiation of product. It's important to remember that we're building out renewables to address climate change and protect the environment. So how those renewables are made and what goes into them is important. It's important that they do not damage the environment in that process, which means there is an opportunity for creating products and value chains that adhere to certain values. And so with that, it's important for us as investors, as off-takers, to demand a value chain and a supply chain that adheres to the principles. We're building out in the US a significant amount on the supply chain side, more than we've ever done before, but we're also working with partners. We're working, for example, through our mineral security partnership to take the largest investors, donors, off-takers, and essentially say, we need to support projects together that adhere to ESG values and that will actually help countries benefit from their geological endowment. We need to help across the chain, not just to promote projects on the upstream, but the midstream, the processing, the refining, the recycling, the final plants. We need to be a part of that, and we need to put our money where our mouth is. So that's something that I think we're now, as policymakers, proactively implementing.
Thank you very much. So this is what we need. We need to create a value change, local value change for all of us, well, all of us, for all who can benefit it from us. And we need partnerships. We'll talk later about that, about how the private and the public system can work together. Let me now turn to Mr. Romeo, Minister from Georgia. How do you see that? What do you think about this issue of creating local value change at the local level to make sure that the benefits keep increasing at the community level?
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, it's my pleasure to be here in such a big conference. Thank you, SPIREC. Thank you, Brain 21, to organize this conference. Of course, it's a very familiar thing for Georgia. I start from beginning. In 2017, when Georgia merged two ministers, Ministry of Energy and Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development. After this, and we received advice from IMF, International Monetary Fund, and also Ministry of Finance to restrict PPA support scheme in Georgia. And after these 5 years, we constructed it's very smiling numbers, but in each year 20 megawatts or 15 megawatts or like this, very small amounts. And if we are talking about Georgia, Georgia has a huge potential of hydro sources. We utilize only 20% of our hydro sources, and most of these hydro sources is medium size and small size. It means huge potential of renewable sources, and because we don't have some support scheme, we can't utilize these sources. And what we received, I think, instead of our colleague mentioned about fiscal risks in budget, and we received, I think, a more dangerous situation. This is independence, yes, and we every day, every year, our consumption increase and increase. And it means our dependence also in neighbor countries, and you know where is located Georgia. It's very beautiful, but also very strong political issue. Yes, around we have 500 borders with Russia, and now we think about it. And after 2022, government launched a new support scheme, how we can extract and how we can invest money in energy sector and utilize our sources and therefore get our energy security. Of course, on this way, it's very important to be close with your population, to close with local population, and trying to explain why this development and why this energy transition, this renewable sources, it's very important for country. Last year we have 10% of economic growth. It means, of course, economic growth and energy growth, it's same numbers. And we're preparing communication strategy with the local population. We plan to explain some awareness raising local population and be more close with population, because for example, we launched in 2016 a project name called net metering system. It means under 500 kilowatt household also can generate it to cover self-consumption, and also if it will be some enough electricity to sell directly distribution company without transmission fee. It's also a very good example to what are the benefit of these activities. And we are on this way, and we try our best to explain and utilize our sources, because if we are talking about energy security, it's not only energy security. And all of us recognize that this is more than energy security and not simple words. This is economy security, this is, I think, freedom, this is country security, etc., etc. Thank you.
No, thank you to you. It is this last point. It's very interesting to take into account. So it's not only energy security, which is very important. It's economic security, and it's about explaining people why this is important for them, for their lives, for the jobs, for the economy, for the community. So many things going on in Georgia right now with all these regulation changes. Thanks for that. Let's gonna now talk about, and let me ask you, Alicia, let's gonna talk about the role of public and private sector. So we have been talking in a way in the other questions about that. How we can make sure that local communities benefit from the deployment of renewable energies by working together. Please.
Thank you very much. I will speak in Spanish, if you allow me. Buenos días a todos y muchas gracias por invitar a CAF a participar en esta sesión. CAF es un banco de desarrollo regional, era un banco pequeño hace 50 años, ahora es un banco donde están 21 países de América Latina y el Caribe. Y hay un tema importante, y es que nuestros accionistas son también nuestros clientes, y el reto que tenemos es convertirnos en el banco verde de la región. CAF quiere ser el banco verde, y lo cual es absolutamente significativo en este debate. Queremos que el 40% de nuestras operaciones se cualifiquen como financiación verde, pero también somos el banco de la reactivación económica post-COVID. Y el debate energético se sitúa en el corazón de estas dos cuestiones. La región, América Latina y el Caribe, tiene un porcentaje muy pequeño en las emisiones globales. Apenas alcanza el 8% de los gases de efecto invernadero. Y de ello, menos de la mitad viene del sector energético. En general, la matriz energética es limpia en América Latina, muy basada en energía hidroeléctrica y ahora con una transición hacia las renovables. Pero obviamente los retos son muy grandes desde el punto de vista de la transición y, como dices, la alianza entre el sector público y el privado es clave. Desde el sector público, CAF lo que hace es apoyar para que se den las señales correctas hacia una transición, pero esto significa tener en cuenta también que la transición justa e inclusiva en América Latina probablemente requiere de un periodo de tiempo más dilatado para hacer posible, primero, una eficiencia energética. Hay que trabajar en la eficiencia energética, hay que trabajar en la integración regional energética y luego hay que hablar de la electrificación del sistema. Ahora mismo el transporte es quizá el sector más emisor y claro, la electrificación del sector del transporte es muy compleja y requiere mucha inversión. Por tanto, lo más importante efectivamente es dar unas señales claras, pero también aportar la tecnología, la financiación, como se ha señalado, y los marcos regulatorios. Ahí es donde estamos nosotros, apoyando en todas estas capacidades institucionales, pero también siendo conscientes de que esta transición, por ejemplo, pasa por el uso del gas como un combustible de sustitución y por tener en cuenta que efectivamente la matriz energética en su componente hidroeléctrica es muy vulnerable a los impactos del cambio climático. Entonces, nosotros creemos que hay que contemplar el problema desde una perspectiva global. No puede ser que la transición genere mayor pobreza, porque ya el cambio climático está generando pobreza y, lógicamente, las sociedades no pueden tener la percepción de que sufren los impactos del cambio climático y sufren los impactos de la transición hacia modelos más limpios. Creemos que es muy importante manejar muy bien las políticas para que efectivamente se generen oportunidades económicas, oportunidades de empleo y que no haya una doble vulnerabilidad, la que viene del cambio climático y la que viene de la transición hacia modelos más limpios. Y en este sentido me gustaría enfatizar el hecho del papel que la región ocupa también en la cadena de suministro internacional. Nosotros somos los suministradores de materias primas que son muy intensivas en consumo energético. Y, por tanto, cuando se habla de la transición para todos, hay que hablar todos desde el punto de vista también de cuál sería el impacto de una interrupción en el suministro energético en América Latina, el impacto en la producción de las materias primas y los productos agropecuarios que ahora mismo están alimentando otros mercados. Esto muchas veces no se introduce en el debate internacional. Efectivamente, hay que hablar de transición hacia energía limpia, pero hay que hablar también de la necesidad de que se siga produciendo lo que es necesario para todos los países, ¿no? Y especialmente en este momento donde pues hay tanta fragilidad en las cadenas de suministro internacionales. América Latina quiere ser una región estable de producción de energía limpia, pero también donde haya seguridad en el suministro, no solo la energía, sino también de los productos que requieren la energía para comercializarse, ¿no? Por tanto, nosotros creemos que es muy importante la labor de las instituciones públicas, en general todas estas condiciones habilitantes, pero también hay que tener en cuenta las distintas sensibilidades del sector privado, no solo energético, sino todo lo que supone pues, la fragilidad de las cadenas de suministro en este momento.
No, muchas gracias. Yo creo que estamos viendo la gran diferencia que hay entre regiones. Antes hablábamos de África y esa gran brecha que tienen de personas sin acceso a la energía, también esa gran riqueza de minerales críticos y cómo puede transformarse también en valor local. Y hablamos ahora de América Latina, que tiene una situación muy diferente, muy pocas emisiones, aún así necesita hacer esa transición en el transporte particularmente, no solo, y que tiene ese sector tan fuerte, extractivo, y que se necesita para seguir trabajando. También ahí la descarbonización es una enorme oportunidad para que forme parte, todas esas empresas y todas esas inversiones latinoamericanas formen parte de esa cadena de valor verde internacional. Muchas gracias, Alicia. Pues, let me ask the same to you, Nelson. Laje, what do you think should be the role of public and private sector to play? I mean, what should play the role to ensure local communities benefit from the deployment of renewable energies?
Bueno, buenos días. También hablaré en español. Y así somos un poco disruptivos también en el formato del panel. Yo creo que no pasa nada. Primero, dar las gracias a SPIREC por la invitación, saludar a los compañeros, ilustres compañeros de panel y empezar por decir que en realidad para alcanzar este grande designio de la neutralidad carbónica, a los días de hoy podemos decir que necesitamos claramente una revolución. Necesitamos una revolución en la verdadera esencia de la palabra. O sea, necesitamos cambios urgentes, necesitamos movilizar mucha gente, necesitamos movilizar todo un sector energético y necesitamos empezar a producir localmente, a tener producción de proximidad y a hacerlo con la participación activa de los ciudadanos. Y a esta revolución somos llamados todos, son llamados las empresas, el sector privado, instituciones, la población, ciudadanos, toda la parte de investigación, la academia, o sea, todos somos llamados a participar y a liderar esta revolución. En lo que concerne al sector privado y el Estado, pues yo diría que el Estado tiene que seguir y cada vez más creando medidas legislativas que se adapten a la realidad, por supuesto, de cada país, pero y hablaba eso antes de entrar, que ayuden a impulsionar la implementación de lo que necesitamos implementar. O sea, medidas que sean medidas viables, flexibles y que permitan cada vez más que la política energética sea una realidad, ¿no? Y por otro lado también que propongan y que sigan facilitando lo que es el apoyo financiero a nuevos proyectos, a nuevas soluciones. O sea, tiene que haber buena legislación y tiene que haber financiamiento para que podamos llevar a cabo esta revolución. Y el sector privado, pues centrarse mucho en nuevos enfoques tecnológicos y en nuevas soluciones también disruptivas, porque en realidad hoy en día vivimos tiempos en que hay que garantizar el suministro entre estados, hay que garantizar el almacenamiento de energía. Si queremos producir más en Europa, si queremos ser autosuficientes en Europa, vamos a tener que lidiar también con el tema de qué hacer con toda la energía, ¿no? Dónde guardarla. Y eso es muy importante que el sector privado también pueda garantizar y que con todo esto genere nuevos modelos de negocio y que hagan mucho más atractivo lo que yo decía de la participación de la producción local. Y eso lleva al tema que todavía no se ha hablado, que yo creo que es muy importante, que es esencial que Estado, sector público, sector privado, generen realmente proyectos y condiciones para que podamos tener cada vez más proyectos que produzcan, consuman, compartan, almacenen y venden. O sea, estamos hablando de comunidades de energía renovable y de autoconsumo. Y por eso es muy importante que en esta revolución este nuevo tipo de lidiar con energía, que son las comunidades de energía renovable, realmente tengan un papel fundamental. ¿Por qué? Porque, como os he dicho, son fundamentales para el proceso de transición energética, son fundamentales también para producir el cambio necesario en la red eléctrica, en las redes eléctricas convencionales para las smart grids, ¿no? O sea, las comunidades pueden ayudar a impulsionar y a potenciar aún más este cambio para smart grids, añadiendo valor y aportando, por supuesto, lo que yo hablaba de seguridad de suministro. Y son también muy importantes, como yo decía antes, para democratizar el acceso a la energía. O sea, hay beneficios claros a nivel social y a nivel económico. Y también son un gran aliado del combate a la pobreza energética. En Portugal tenemos un gran problema con la pobreza energética. Estamos ahora aprobando, o creo que vamos a aprobar una estrategia de largo plazo para el combate a la pobreza energética, y las comunidades van a ser de gran ayuda en ese combate. Y además promueve todo lo que es el tema de cohesión territorial, ¿no? De proximidad, de las inversiones locales, de dinamizar todo el territorio. Por eso son tan importantes las comunidades. Y por otro lado, también para reforzar el papel de todos, de ciudadanos, de empresas, del municipio, de todo un sector en esta revolución, ¿no? En la descarbonización y en la transición energética. Y que sea pues justa, que sea cohesa, que sea democrática, que genere mucho más empleo. Y ese es un tema que yo creo que hablaremos hoy también, que es cómo generar más empleo y qué tipo de empleo podemos generar con la transición energética, y también lo que se hablaba ya antes, cómo dinamizar más la economía. O sea, es muy importante que la economía no sea un motivo para frenar, o sea, que hay que dinamizar mucho más la economía, generando mucho más empleo. Un dato muy sencillo en Portugal. En Portugal tenemos el objetivo de 80% de producción renovable en 2025. En enero de este año alcanzamos 88%. Y lo estamos haciendo porque invertimos mucho en solar, invertimos mucho en comunidades de energía. Tenemos una legislación que no es muy vieja, o sea, tiene un par de años, pero es una legislación que ya ha cambiado una vez, se ha adaptado ya una vez, y está potenciando una inmensidad de proyectos de autoconsumo, de comunidades, y eso está claramente ayudando al país a cumplir con las metas que tiene encima de la mesa, y estamos con resultados muy positivos, y el sentido es de invertir más en solar, invertir más en eólico, invertir más en comunidades de energía renovable, invertir más en energía. Por eso yo diría que este es el camino, y el sector público y el privado tienen un papel determinante en esto de traer para el proceso el ciudadano.
No, muchas gracias. Ha sido muy interesante cómo hemos ido pasando por las diferentes realidades de las diferentes partes del mundo, ahora más focalizados en Europa. Cómo Europa está dando un cambio en los últimos tres y pico años fundamental en su política energética, en su manera de entender la energía de un punto de vista muy diferente, con estas nuevas ideas como las comunidades energéticas, que hace poco tiempo hubieran sido difícilmente pensables. Me quedo con un par de ideas de lo que has dicho, porque creo que pueden ser muy interesantes para otros países, otras regiones. También Romeo antes en su intervención lo decía. Necesitamos adaptar las medidas a la realidad que tenemos cambiante muy rápidamente. Y esa idea de la adaptación y encontrar la mejor manera, encontrar esa manera que produzca las renovables que necesitamos, obviamente para luchar contra la crisis climática, pero también para crear empleo, ese empleo local, y también para dinamizar la economía en zonas particularmente complicadas. Me imagino que en Portugal será parecido a España, zonas rurales, por ejemplo. Es fundamental y es el momento y es la situación que estamos teniendo ahora que no podemos dejar pasar, y no la estamos dejando pasar porque los datos que dabas de Portugal son impresionantes. Bueno, pues muchas gracias. Pasamos de nuevo a inglés y let me now turn to English again and then ask Gloria from Zimbabwe again. Let's gonna keep talking about this idea of creating local value. You were, in your introductory remarks, you were also talking about this idea of critical minerals and about how to access to finance in a greater way to make sure that your country and African countries are part of this energy revolution that is so much needed. Tell me a little bit more about that. How we can ensure public support? Is it an issue there in your country? Are there other societal barriers? Or it's okay, everybody's happy with the new projects? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Thank you so much for that. I think when it comes to localization and using the local resources vis-a-vis the renewable energy technologies, there's recognition that there is certain developments which have happened in the past where even if we were to do our own research and development to try and compete against certain economies which have perfected the art of doing things like solar panels, we might not be able to get there at the right cost. But we also recognize that renewables are not just about solar PV. There's hydro, there's geothermal, there's other renewables where local resources, other than the critical minerals which feed into the development of the technologies, there are certain local resources which we believe are critical. So if you look at the Zimbabwean energy policy, it's very clear that when you come in to do renewable energy, there is need for you to use at least the local people. Try and employ as much of the local people as possible. You also need to see how much of the local resources can be included in your technologies or your new, because a lot of people are really more looking at jobs more than trying to say, not in my backyard. I think we are at a different level where someone is at a basic need, and those who have already enjoyed the benefits of modern energy and who are now saying, oh no, we don't want it this way, we'll prefer it that way. So we are at different levels. For us, it's employment creation, it's value creation in participation of the other local resources. I'll give you a typical example. If you are to build a large hydro dam, you will need, for the structures, steel, you will need aggregates, sand, you will need cement. So if you are building a large hydro in a country like Zimbabwe, we did a check in terms of if we are to build Batoka, which is 2,400 megawatts, we will create almost about 20,000 jobs. Just on mining of the iron and the processing of the chrome, the steel. I'll bring in the coal, where we will need the coking coal for the steel industry, the smelters, which provide jobs. We also need the cement companies, which have to produce the cement and create. So there's a whole economy which comes up from this project, which will span over a period of 6 years, but it will create a totally new development in the sector. We also recognize that when it comes to other renewables like solar, obviously local participation in terms of the actual technology might be minimal, but we want you at least the structures to try and use the local steel structures for you to, especially if you're doing ground mounted. And we have cable manufacturing companies which we believe can be upscaled and updated to ensure that the standard of cables they do will be appropriate for the technologies. So we believe that from our own societal norms, people want jobs. We have a lot of youth which we are churning into the job market which don't have jobs. So as long as a project and a technology is bringing in human development, people will be happy. The demand and the gap is so huge, so that it will be a mammoth task to say that we'll end up with stranded assets of any kind. Whatever we have now, we just need to upscale and improve. And we also believe that there is need to, for our technology partners to engage in technology transfer, which is genuine and allows people to actually be part of the, as a region. Zimbabwe is sitting right in Southern African continent, in the middle of that. We can be an assemble for solar panels, which will be supplying Zambia, Botswana, South Africa. So it's, the market is there, the demand is there. What we need is for the private sector to come in and we work together, whether through private-public partnerships or as private sector completely, to create these companies and structures which will allow for us to have a future for our youth which are struggling with jobs. And then the other issue about the local structures is that land culturally belongs to traditional chiefs. But we have seen that a lot of the new solar projects which are coming up in some of these rural communities are actually driven by these traditional leaders. What we have done is to empower them and give them the information they need, and they've seen it as a way of improving the quality of life within their communities, and they are so welcoming to these new technologies. And they also become part of the projects by giving certain value, either in form of land or as a lease or a total participation as equity into the projects. So that ability for the communities to participate in a small way, you evaluate the land, what does it cost into the new project, and find that ability to give the community a certain portion of that value apart from the normal social responsibility which will come with, you find that in some of these communities, there are schools, there are clinics which might not be electrified, and we'll expect those who come into those communities to also do certain social programs for the communities, building schools, electrifying them, building clinics, electrifying them, and that has actually brought in a lot of buy-in and cooperation and collaboration between the communities and the developers of these technologies. So, and the issue of creation of employment using local is quite critical, because once they are employed in those projects, they actually protect the assets against any form of vandalism or any destruction which can come from others who might want to steal. So we believe that the value of local resources cannot be overemphasized, starting from the real value at development of the technologies themselves, right to the implementation of the projects, to ensure that the participation of locals is done right from the environmental social impact assessments, how, if there's going to be any movement of people, how are they going to be compensated, and how are they going to be assured that once they leave their own homes, they'll be able to get something more comfortable than where they are?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We will talk about employment just in a little while, but let me now turn to you, Paolo, and let me ask you something about important that we have talked already about that. Tell me how we can accelerate international finance to ensure universal energy access.
So, in a nutshell, we have to make sure that more private capital goes to where it is mostly needed, which is in emerging economies and developing countries. And I think there are two keywords. One is risk, and second is scale. On the first of all, we need to understand the risks. These are well known, and for you in particular, from country risk to off-taker risk, land, there are a number of things that governments can do. And I stress the importance of public policy. Good public policy is a precondition for everything that follows. There is no risk mitigation facility that can work if the policy is wrong. Then countries can do many things. Think about land. Think about what India has done with solar parks in India, which has been really, really a big motor. Or having auctions with very clear clauses about hard currency, termination, who is the repartition of funds. And then we can, when all this is done, there can be some guarantees mechanism. A new role of multilateral development banks will be very important in this transition. And I would like to mention that the IEA is working with the IFC exactly on this, with something that will be published in June. But the second aspect, to me, is even more important. And I would like to pick what Gloria said, the three parts. And it's linking renewables to a new form of economic development and industrialization in these countries. And I would sense three things. First, renewable is not just solar PV. There are a lot of industries with low, medium temperature heat requirements, like agro-food, textiles, where renewables, other forms of renewables that we never speak about, can be touched. My microphone goes.
Yeah, technicians coming.
Thank you. Okay, sorry. Now, second, the supply chains. We are in a very different world from just 1-2 years ago, and there is a recognition of how this is diversifying supply chain becomes a strategic interest for the whole world, which means someone in the rich countries is ready to invest money, to risk, because this is in our interest. So this is the second part. And Gloria also mentioned hydrogen. I would absolutely not underestimate this because of the scale. And this will take a big part of the off-taker risk away. Of course, the hydrogen plants need to be done in such a way that there are positive spillovers for the local economy, and then these spillovers will be key to make a local sustainable industry also for energy access and for the power system. This is our view. Thank you.
Thank you, Paolo, for the good ideas for the public sector, for the private sector, and for the international development banks as well. And how to turn the whole ecosystem into jobs and these positive spillovers of this sustainable industry that can be developed linked to renewable energies. So let me turn now to Romeo. And what are your feelings? How do you see that from Georgia about the same question? What should be the role of international finance in order to make sure that this transition goes faster, let's say? Yeah, tell us.
Yeah, thank you. I continue my answer because its question is not same but similar. I talked, the main priority of Georgia's government is utilize our sources, because we, the last December, government of Georgia launched new support scheme, CFD mechanism. It means contract for differences. Every person, every entity who wants to develop renewable sources in Georgia have opportunity to join auction and get and bid some acceptable tariff to get CFD contract for 15 years. Why it's important? Because for private sector, it's a long-term predictable situation. and they feel safety, the important is. And of course, if, and I mentioned about the huge sources of hydro, not only hydro, if we develop hydro, it means we can additional sources of wind, solar, other renewables. But what we approved from IMF, it's totally 1,500 megawatt for CFD contract, and this 1,500 is 900 in hydro, 250 in solar, 250 in wind, and 50 megawatts in other renewables. I mean hydrogen, biomass, geothermal, etc., etc. And if we construct this, of course, it means it's not concluding one area of Georgia. It means in every area of Georgia, we hope we'll have development. And of course, it means in these areas increase some values, increase job creation. It means to increase job creation. It means to then, of course, it's not only one activities from our government. The very important also activities is the sharing of tax, property tax. We, in close collaboration with Norwegian Water and Energy Sources Agency, and they have very good experience in Norway, how they share property taxes with local communities. It means of course, the taxi payers, of course, the property taxi goes directly in local municipality, but not in local community. And now we adopted a draft of law. It means the most part of this property taxi spent to this area, this renewable, planned renewable project area. It means also people who living in this area feel and get some profit, get some benefit from this, and this most of this tax, property tax, distributed to this local community. It's also very important. Also, I mentioned about it means also it helps to awareness rising, and everything together, yes, apologize, everything together give us chance to be more energy security and decrease our dependence in neighbor countries.
Yes, thank you very much. I have here the remaining time in front of me, and we only have like a couple of minutes. And I wanted to touch about this employment issue and just transition and skilling and reskilling. And I wanted to ask you, how do you see that? It is a big issue when we talk about energy transition. We are doing that with the coal mining and the coal power plant sector in Spain, and we are very mindful about the difficulties and the opportunities that we have with that. Tell us a little bit more about your perspective on employment and jobs and just transition.
Absolutely, and skilling and reskilling, upskilling, it's all important. It will all be critical, it will all be necessary. But I will say, I think the first most important thing is to understand what jobs will be available in the short term, in the long term, when we account for automation, temporally, geographically. Is it actually aligned at the local level? We can't just tell someone, go move your family over here, you're going to do this for a short period of time. So we need to have a very clear understanding of what it means and how to address that. And that also needs to be reflected in how we're investing. So I was fortunate enough to lead a session on a transition that Irina organized at Sharm el-Sheikh. And one union representative said, training's not enough. People keep thinking training is enough. We need investment. And that's true. We need to invest in the jobs, and then we can train. And then we need to also make sure those jobs reflect our values in that investment. For those that follow the US market, you might have seen we passed our largest legislation to impact climate and clean energy in August, the Inflation Reduction Act. If you actually look at the details, out of the $369 billion that are to go into the energy sector, the majority of it is in tax incentives. To actually utilize the majority of those benefits, you would need to, almost all technologies, would need to actually meet labor provision on wages and apprenticeship. And there are bonus incentives if the projects are in communities that are considered energy communities, brown sites, communities that were dependent on fossil fuels for a very large portion of the jobs, low-income communities as well. It was built into it because there's a realization that the workforce transition is critical for the energy transition, and it's not easy. We have to be able to say it's a priority. And we do this internationally as well. The Just Energy Transition partnerships through which donors have put money together to be able to invest in energy transitions in key countries of high emission, those are also, the reason it has just in it is because the workforce component is core. So that's something, I'll end there because I know we're short on time, but I think at the end of the day, we always say, you know what people's priorities are based on where they spend their time and money. It's not any different for a company or a country.
No, thank you very much, Soya. We don't have a lot more time. I wanted to ask the same question to you, Nelson. I don't know if you want to add something about jobs and just transition and the changing within the different economic sectors. And then I will give you the floor, just 1 minute, first of all to you, Alicia, to wrap up. Nelson.
Muy rápido porque el tiempo...
Por favor, sí. Y,
ya vamos con tiempo.
Bueno.
yo diría que el desarrollo de renovables en los últimos años en realidad ha tenido un impacto muy positivo, muy importante en el tema de empleo, no solamente en industria, pero también en construcción, en servicios, en tecnología, y eso es notable. Pero por otro lado también esta velocidad a que la transición energética y la descarbonización va y que queremos que vaya, incluso queremos que vaya más rápido, ha causado aquí algunas disrupciones en lo que es el mercado laboral. O sea, tenemos un nuevo y gran desafío que es cerrar brechas entre lo que son las calificaciones existentes, o sea, el tipo de trabajo existente y el que es el necesario, el que es exigido por el mercado y por toda esta transición. Y ese es el gran desafío, ¿no? O sea, saber lo que existe, saber lo que necesitamos, sacar provecho de lo que tenemos y construir algo nuevo. Doy un ejemplo. El tema es tan importante que en el marco de la presidencia europea que tenemos de las agencias de energía, de la red de ENER, hemos hecho un estudio sobre realmente esto, los green jobs, sobre los empleos verdes y sobre la importancia que ellos tienen para la situación actual y el gran contributo que las agencias también pueden dar a la hora de definir un poco cuál es el futuro del mercado laboral en lo que se refiere a energía. Y una de las conclusiones es que realmente es importante invertir mucho en formación, invertir mucho en capacitación. Nosotros en Portugal hemos lanzado el primer Centro Nacional de Formación para la Transición Energética. Vamos a tener el primer centro especializado y enfocado solamente en profesiones asociadas a la transición energética, porque esto es una manera de realmente combatir y cerrar estas brechas, ¿no? O sea, captar gente que sigue siendo gente muy válida, ¿no? Y darle una nueva formación. Vamos a tener un centro nacional específico solamente para eso. Y eso es invertir en formación, eso es invertir en capacitación, invertir en el futuro en realidad, porque la transición no se hace sin personas, la economía no se desarrolla sin personas. Las renovables son para las personas, como es el eslogan de este gran evento, ¿no? Y entonces la formación es parte muy importante de todo este proceso. Y yo diría que habrá aquí un gran desarrollo de los empleos verdes y que los gobiernos tienen realmente que reforzar el compromiso con las políticas públicas actuales de formación en este sector. Lo estamos haciendo en Portugal. Creo que en España también, creo que Europa está dando sus pasos. Las agencias de energías como el IDAE, como ADEN, como otras a nivel europeo, son fundamentales para apoyar a los gobiernos en identificar, en apoyar, en capacitar. Nosotros en ADEN tenemos una academia, incluso, que es de la agencia, que capacita, que forma técnicos y que va también a seguir haciendo su labor en ese sentido. Pero además del Centro Nacional, seguiremos con esa labor. Y yo creo que es muy importante que a nivel europeo también, y mundial, por supuesto, que las agencias de energía, sean institutos, sean agencias, sea cual sea el formato jurídico, por así decir, que inviertan mucho en políticas de formación para empleos verdes.
Nosotros en España estamos haciendo algo muy parecido, no podemos estar más de acuerdo contigo, pero enfocándonos a las personas que ya están en el mercado laboral, dentro del Instituto para la Transición Justa y haciendo la recualificación profesional, el reciclaje profesional, particularmente difícil para algunos sectores como puede ser la minería de carbón. Encontrar la manera adecuada para que una persona que tiene que seguir dando salario a su familia y apoyando a su familia, pueda tener ese espacio de formación para poder acceder a la nueva economía, es uno de los grandes desafíos y muy de acuerdo con todo lo que has dicho. Pues, Alicia, si no te importa, te doy la palabra así para terminar. Tenemos ya 0 minutos. Cuéntanos un poco tu visión. ¿Está funcionando bien a nivel internacional todo este tema de la transición energética con bien desarrollo local positivo? ¿Necesitaríamos algún cambio?
Yo creo que es necesaria una nueva mirada. El debate quizá ha estado muy centrado en la visión de países europeos, donde bueno, pues la transición puede estar ya muy avanzada, los incentivos se han trabajado de manera correcta, pero creo que hay que ver la diversidad en materia energética y que quizá todavía no se ha trabajado suficiente cuál puede ser el papel de otras regiones o la situación de otras regiones, África por supuesto, pero también América Latina. Hay que trabajar en este desfase temporal. Creo que las instituciones multilaterales tenemos que bueno, pues reforzar toda la mitigación de riesgo, pero no solo del riesgo económico, sino también del riesgo social. Hay un tema importante que hay que tener también mucho cuidado con la fragilidad bueno, pues de los sistemas sociales en muchos países donde el tema energético muchas veces pues, genera circunstancias complejas de manejar y eso yo creo que en este debate no siempre se introduce y esta mirada muy centrada en la transición en Europa, por ejemplo, con medidas como los mecanismos de compensación en frontera que ahora se están trabajando y que pueden tener un impacto muy negativo sobre las economías de otros países si no se dan pues, las ayudas adecuadas, la inversión adecuada. Creo que la estabilidad geopolítica también tiene que introducirse en este debate y hacer que la regulación sea consistente, porque muchas veces los mensajes que estamos viendo ahora es que se dice una cosa, pero a lo mejor se hace otra, ¿no? Y esto desde América Latina se ve como con cierta confusión y creo que eso no es bueno. Hay que dar mensajes muy claros de hacia dónde vamos, dar información, dar capacitación, pero a veces es cierto que bueno, pues hay una cierta inconsistencia en los mensajes y las acciones que no es nada buena, ¿no? Pero en todo caso no separar nunca el debate energético del climático y del social, de las personas.
Pues con eso nos quedamos. Muchas gracias a todos los panelistas y muchas gracias a todos ustedes. Thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the sessions that we have ahead of us. Thank you.
Con esta mesa redonda terminan las sesiones de hoy en esta plenaria. Les invitamos ahora a tomar un café en el hall principal. Muchas gracias.